The whole idea originally of the Dex Effects albums was to find a way to experiment with what I thought DJing was, or where it was going. The first Dex Effects album, the original one, was really a combination of a number of years of DJing out with a mixer and effects boxes. So it was very close to a traditional DJ mix. It had 28 to 29 tracks, and the basic idea was taking those tracks and modifying them with the use of external effects, modifying, filtering, delaying, and things like that. Quite simple in today's terms. The second album, DE9, Closer to the Edit, took that idea and took it a little bit more extreme, but only because of the technological and software updates of those times. At that time, there was things that allowed me to lock the tempo of all the loops together and not worrying about beat matching. In the end, on DE9, Closer to the Edit, I think there was 150 different loops and bits and pieces, but everything on a very microscopic scale, because the software back in 2000 was very good at locking up the tempo of 5 or 10 seconds, maybe 20 seconds if you could push it, but after that things started to fall out. Now with DE9 transitions, 3 or 4 years later, most of the software from that time has now updated, new things have happened, and now the biggest possibility that you have is to take full tracks and beat match them. So now, if DE9 Closer to the Edit was about the loop, DE9 Transitions is about, what happens if you have hundreds of full compositions, and what happens if you start to mix those freely together. All the Dex Effects albums have always had a little bit of their test bed or the experimenting of the ideas on the actual DJ live circuit. So when you start to manipulate 3 or 4 different loops, you have a vocal piece from one record going and 3 or 4 kind of what I call bed tracks, just drums and beats and kicks going. Then the modification of the songs that people recognize goes to another extreme. The last number of years, as this whole idea of Dex Effects has kind of continued, one of the things that has held me back is actually the DJ mixer hardware console. So the last number of years I've been doing modifications and working with Alan and Heath, coming up with new ways of controlling music and sounds during my DJ sets. So Dex Effects, I think in general, is always kind of this, is always very tied to what's happening with technology today and also what possibly is going to be happening with technology tomorrow. I'm always inspired by, of course, the records and the music that's coming out, but I'm always looking, okay, well, is there something new? Is there a new software, new hardware that enables me to play these music or these records out in a different way? And when I first heard electronic music back in the late 80s, it was the sound I was looking for, even though I didn't know I was looking for it. It was everything that kind of brought all my areas of interest together. I was into music and art, computers and technology, and suddenly there was a sound that was tied to the technology. It was as much about the sound as it was about how that sound was created. And so the Dex Effects series is a continuation of that. Yeah, the album title Transitions comes from having the ability to work with longer pieces of music now. When you think about DJing in the past, if you throw away beat matching, if you don't worry about that, then one of the most important things that a DJ could do was to make a really, really nice segue or a really amazing transition. And so once I started playing with all these tracks, and once I started to use and kind of build a basic idea of the album in Ableton, I was really, well, I don't have to worry about, you know, these things. I can leave these records for 10 minutes. They're going to stay in time. That part is done. So where do I focus my attention? And I was like, okay, well, how far can I go into the transition between one song and another, between 2 and 3 songs, or even 10 songs? And, you know, how can you build upon the idea of a transition? If you just start taking small bits and pieces from 5 or different areas of the mix, 5 or different frequencies, then the transition can become even more powerful. The transition for me is something which is, whether it's musical or whether it's in life, when we go from one age to another or one area of our lives to another, it's really interesting when you get to a new point musically or in your life, and only then do you realize that you're somewhere different. But you don't really notice the small little minutes and seconds as it's actually happening. And that's really what this mix is about on one level. It's going through moments in time, through different feelings, different emotions, but always asking yourself, how did I get here? Wasn't I just there? And by the time you've asked this question to yourself, you're actually already somewhere else. And that was kind of the challenge. One level of the transition was this kind of timeline transition between one moment and the other. The second level of that was what I call the spatial transition of moving away from the traditional stereo field of sound recording and moving into somewhere where I've really wanted to go for the last number of years, and that is in surround sound 5.1. Once the final mix was done, we took what I'd finished in the Berlin studio to Galaxy Studios in Belgium. You know, when you start working outside of the stereo paradigm and you start working with 5.1 channels, you know, it gets very, very complicated very fast. So it was great working with Ronald there to actually check how this type of music would really, really sound in surround. After the basic version of transition was done in Ableton, I then imported the whole session into Pro Tools to have further options and power for the surround version. Pro Tools gives me more options with the actual surround placement of the different components of the mix. It has special plugins for working with the 5.1 surround system, and also has a little bit more power in the effects and different manipulations that I need to do to make sure the actual whole mix comes together. The interesting thing that's happened now with the stereo mix, you know, most people would think that, you know, if they can't hear the 5.1 mix, they're missing something. And for sure, they are missing something because the main version is 5.1. But because I built the mix with 5.1 in my head, the whole kind of the way everything has ended up is much more spatial and much more open than ever before. You know, even the stereo mix feels like there's much more depth and much more placement of sound than ever before. For me, surround is another new area, which is like a little bit, you know, the early days of techno, when there was no rules. On the DVD, there's actually a number of audio-visual components. All the visual stuff has actually been created with a friend of mine, a video artist from Turkey, Ali, who has been working together with me for the last couple of years on Plastic Man videos and just kind of experimenting back and forth. It took me a long time to actually meet anyone who was, I guess, able to see things as I hear them. And so since we met, we've been able to come up with a number of interesting projects. during the planning stages of the DE9 project, Ali actually sent over some basic ideas of video sampling after he was explaining it to me. One of the pieces was from a Tchaikovsky film, a Russian director, quite famous for Solaris, but this was from a smaller film he did called Stalker. And what Ali had done was taken a small section of the film and actually basically left it quite the same, found a piece from the second DE9 closer to the edit and put the pieces together. A couple of slight edits, a couple of slight filters, very, very, very minimal, very similar to what I do musically. And it had such power and depth. But again, it was just, he had just seen it slightly differently. And this is, was really, really inspiring for me. And so we took that as part of the basis of the visual aspect of the DE9 Transitions project. And to continue on with that idea, we've also now completed a new video which is based upon that. So it's kind of the idea of a video remix. We've taken the inspiration from the Stalker piece and kind of turned the tables on it and put me inside of that type of scene again and tied it to the music. Very, very, in some ways simple. Not a lot of fast cuts or wipes or effects. Very, very subtle. And I think that's the connection that Ali and I have musically and visually, is that both areas are interested in subtleties that perhaps not everybody appreciates.